This is Metabolic Radio, the podcast dedicated to keeping you informed when it comes to everything fitness. My name is Taylor Empey, and with the help of my co-host Shane Pace, we aim to expose the truths about the health and fitness industry. The information and suggestions given in this podcast should not be considered as clinical or medical advice. Consult with a physician before implementing any information provided on this podcast. All right, and we're off.
And again.
Here we go. So, what are we talking about?
Sewing?
I
don't even know.
Sewing. Last time it was pizza, and now it's sewing.
We are sewing pizza.
I like how we just hit record and go.
Yes, randomly.
Yeah. Warm-ups, I believe. That's what it was. Yeah. Okay.
So
there is something that people...
Oh, warm-ups!
There's something that people neglect.
I get you. Holy crap. I never would have guessed this.
And I think it's a very underutilized technique for multiple reasons, but it is warming up. And I think that people confuse what warming up really is.
I agree with
they
that.
don't understand the real importance of it. And not even just importance, but how it will aid their results.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are we going to discuss stretching?
In a sense.
So I
don't want to cover recovery stretching.
Okay, so this is going to be, since we have not really truly discussed how this was going to go, I am going to play with this one.
Oh gosh, okay.
No, go ahead. I'm not playing yet. I'm just preparing. I'm warming up.
Now I don't know what to do. Okay. Anyway, the route I was going to take this.
Excellent.
There's a lot of ways that you can warm up, but there's more effective ways, depending on what you're doing. So the way that I tell people, that I educate clients to warm up, because, the majority of people come in, they jump on a cardio machine for a few minutes. 5-minute aerobic warm up, and then they go.
And I hate that.
And that's probably the most common practice that I see.
And that's probably the worst thing you could do, in my opinion.
Not the worst thing you could do.
Okay, but near.
Not warming up is the worst thing.
I guess not coming to the gym.
Yeah.
Would be worse.
But
are you taking the mic because I'm getting red zoned?
No, I'm pushing it because you're too far over that way.
Oh, so you're trying to actually get me so I'm heard.
Kind of. Anyway. So with warm-ups, I think that they should be somewhat, maybe not technically aerobic, but they should elevate the heart rate to a certain extent to increase blood flow.
Okay.
To the muscle.
I don't know. To an extent, I would not argue that, but
why?
I would probably differ.
Why? Do you want me to do my whole thing and then you can?
Yes.
Try to...
Let's talk through. Let's start it off and go down defining the purpose of warming up.
The purpose of warming up is actually, a lot of people talk about injury prevention. That's actually, there's not as much evidence to support injury prevention.
Well, I think warm up there is. I think stretching there's not. I think stretching actually causes.
Okay,
that's the reason why I wanted to talk about this in conjunction.
Yeah,
people think a lot of time with warm up, it deals with stretching and.
See, I come from warm up from the approach of range of motion, mobility, priming the muscle from a more effective sets or more effective workouts.
I would 100% agree with that.
That's the purpose of why I have people warm up.
Right. That's a good definitive.
A byproduct of what I do, because I do a lot of dynamic movements in my warm-ups, is an increase in mobility for people.
Well, I think
and range of motion.
If you're doing dynamic stuff, you have more motion to it, and it will raise your heart rate.
Yeah, exactly.
So I agree with that.
And so those are the reasons, I think, is because increasing blood flow. For if you're going to be doing a lot of resistance training, you're going to be in anaerobic glycolysis, so you're going to need glycogen. So that means if you don't have enough glycogen in your muscles, which many people actually don't because of certain eating patterns, you need glucose being delivered to the muscle.
Okay.
It causes blood to swell in the muscle when you do even slightly light priming exercises. I have people do priming exercises because when you're for the CNS communication.
Giving you the
Why?
Indian 8-ball.
Okay. Communicating electrical impulses to the muscle so that, for example, if you do kettlebell swings or hip bridges before you go into a squat, right, you now have a better neuromuscular communication going on, so you can activate your glutes a lot more effectively in the bottom of a squat to extend the hips coming out of it, especially in a person who doesn't know how to do that, so you have a more effective squat. I also do the dynamic warm-ups or the dynamic stretching and mobility drills. For example, if someone has a hard time sitting into a squat, if you get them doing certain hip movements to open those up to be able to allow them to sit into their hips, that increases their ability to perform sets more effectively in that exercise with better form. And do the same thing with range of motion in the shoulder joints. So most of my warm-ups are oriented around the shoulders and hips. So yeah, that's why I think those are aspects of warm-ups that people miss, and I don't think they realize that's a focus for them and a purpose for them. It's not just necessarily injury prevention, and it's not just I'm warming up for the sake of warming up. And there are specific things you can do that will be more effective warm-ups than just aerobic cardio type warm-up.
So I get the 8-ball back.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so
we're actually using the talking stick type of concept that we talked about a few episodes back, except we have our magic mystery. What would you call this?
It's the 8-ball.
Fortune teller 8-ball.
Yeah.
And so now I stole it from Shane, so I could talk.
He did,
and here it goes to Shane.
That's okay.
Bye.
So, but here's the problem. So what you do, I agree with. Okay, so let's talk at shoulder stuff. So shoulder injuries, if you warm them up correctly, it's going to warm up the muscles so they are ready to work, and it's the stabilization muscles that are the biggest things that you're warming up. So absolutely warming up, especially hips, knees, and even ankles. If you have ankle injuries, by doing rotation exercise and stuff, will actually decrease the potential of injury. So in theory, you're right. Okay, in theory, doing the things that you're talking about is right. Dynamic stretching is a bad deal because it will actually cause your muscles to lengthen and
No. Sorry.
I have the 8-ball.
Okay.
So what'll happen is cause your muscles, even though it warms them up. Okay, and I'll give you some of this because I'll give you that it does warm your muscles up. It's the movement itself that is actually causing you to get blood flowing through it. If you're doing a dynamic stretch, you're actually going to stretch it beyond its normal capacity, and doing that outside of it is different. So we'll talk about that probably in more detail, and I'll give you your moment on that one. But that's the reason why I wouldn't recommend dynamic stretching before. That being said,
what would you recommend?
Warming up. So
okay, but what? That's what I'm saying.
Just movements for your hip. The stuff you're talking about with your hip movement, that's phenomenal for squats. Okay, that's true without question. Doing stuff to warm up your shoulder joint, like doing rotations, doing the different rotations that you can do with weights to strengthen your shoulder girdle is actually good things because those are going to warm up the musculature. It isn't going to raise your heart necessarily, but it's going to cause the blood flow to actually start moving to that area and actually cause it to be, if you will, more lubricated, so that it'll have less potential of injury. The more you stretch something before an exercise, the more potential you have for damage. And the reason why is because it's moving in the wrong direction for what you're trying to do. So if you're doing let's say you're going to go into squats, if you start doing stuff like trying to work toward the splits while you're doing squat exercises, it's going to actually make it a weaker joint.
That's a static stretch.
I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that, and you're not listening to the 8-ball.
I'm just expecting it sometime.
He's not. He's fighting the 8-ball. I let him have the 8-ball, and he is fighting it. I just want that pointed out, people. Just want to point it out. Okay. I tried really hard because I'm worse at this than you are. So, but okay. So the whole concept is, and you're right. Dynamic stretching and static stretching are different. Okay, but when you start talking about dynamic stretching, most dynamic stretching is based off facilitating stretching, which is the same concept. It just uses movement to get there. I'm not beating you up because it's a better way to stretch anyway. But like I said, we should talk stretching in this too. Warming up to me, though, is making it so that you have more mobility in your joints, which is what you're getting at, and make it so you have more of a central nervous system attachment, which is what you're getting at. Okay, your base premise I agree with completely, dude. I completely agree with where you're going with it. The problem I've got with it is if someone goes in there and just starts to run, which is what, like we were talking about at the beginning, like you brought up, is what their concept is of warming up. They're warming up their
circulatory.
Not necessarily the circulatory system. They're, gosh, my brain's stopping.
Give me a term to work with.
Just breathing. Respiratory. The respiratory system. So they work more on the respiratory and to a small extent the circulatory system. But in 5 minutes they're not doing much to that. So that's why I say it's very minimal to that. It's more breathing based, and they raise their heart rate so it does hit that. Okay. But it's not really sending the blood where it needs to go. It's going to the wrong spot. So then when they go from that and they start working out, it's a different beast. Does that make sense? So
no, I agree with you.
So when you talk warming up, that's the reason why, when you brought this up to an extent, Taylor's better. I'm gonna throw this out before I hand this back to him because I'm about to. But Taylor's better by far at warming up than I am. I'm more geared towards the idea of using the exercises themselves to warm up. So like if I was going to bench press, I would go in and I would warm up with 135 pounds, and then I'd go to 155 pounds or 170 pounds, and then I'd go up from there. And then when I got to my working sets, I would be at a higher weight, and that's how I warm up. Is that optimal? I don't think it personally is. I think that because I have shoulder problems, and so if I was to listen to his advice much more, I would actually warm my shoulder joint up, the glenohumeral joint as it's called. I would work on actually warming that up because it would actually give it more strength and more stability, and it would cause less injury. And he's right on that. I admit that, but I warm up slightly differently because that's how I do it. Is I'll use the weight itself in the actual movement that I'm doing. They're both a form of work of warming up, but one is more directly on the joints that are actually being affected. And so I want to give him kudos on that before I hand this over to him, and then I will just do that.
Cool. I have the 8-ball. So when you do your warm-up sets, in fact, that doesn't make sense. Is the muscle, in fact, not stretching, or is it stretching?
Well, now you have the 8-ball. I'm not supposed to even talk.
Well, I'm allowed. When I engage you in conversation, you can do this.
All right. Yeah, it's stretching, of course.
Okay, so during the eccentric contraction, which is really a stretch, it's stretching. So dynamics.
It's okay to define that a little better.
Okay, well,
let me answer your question in more detail. It is a controlled pressing against the stretching, so it still is still restricting the length of the muscle. If that makes sense. But does it stretch? Yeah, it has to because of the way it's going.
But it depends on the range of motion that you're dealing with.
Agreed.
So, and dynamics are movement based. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be doing elaborate stretching techniques with them. An exercise in its nature is dynamic, with whether it has weight or not, right? So when I say I go through dynamic movements, and maybe I said stretching because I do some of that. Well, one, I think dynamic stretching is important pre-workout because the muscles are engaged. They're not in a what's the word? A relaxed state. They are lengthening, but they're engaged during dynamics. For example, you do a full range of motion body squat, you're dealing with range of motion and dynamic mobility with your hips and knees. The quads are in a lengthened, almost a fully lengthened state, right? But they're engaged. So that's kind of where I'm coming at when I'm talking about dynamics. So like a person needs, certain individuals will need to lengthen, let's say, their glutes and quads in order to get the proper range of motion and depth into a squat. So that's why I do engage in some lengthening techniques, but I don't do I used to do static stretching, and I don't because I know that that's not ideal that's in fact detrimental to warming up for a workout. Static stretching is better for recovery and post, but in my opinion. And then let's see, what other point was I going to make? But that's kind of the main reason why I do dynamics. And when I'm doing dynamics, I'm not necessarily doing all stretches. It's oriented around muscle engaging through range of motion with and everything that I do is most of it is, I'll say, is body weight or calisthenic based, but that's still resistance. It's just you're choosing to warm up with weights through the actual movement itself with appropriate lighter resistance, whereas I'm choosing to mimic the movement through maybe a body weight or a calisthenic avenue. But I do think range of motion is important, because if you don't train a muscle through a specific range, it will be weak in that range. And so that's why I like to focus on appropriate ranges of motion for specific muscle groups prior to getting under a heavy amount of weight, because if I haven't gone through that range of motion, my nervous system hasn't been kind of told that we're going to work in that range of motion. So you may end up injuring yourself because it might think that you're stretching too far beyond what it thinks you're capable of, or what it thinks you ought to do. So that's the premise that I come at it from.
Okay, and I get that. Okay, so let me define from at least my education in massage therapy. Facilitated / dynamic stretching, which are basically the same term. Okay, is where you do to define it better for you.
Sure,
is to do a push. So you push into a person, an object.
Passive stretching.
And then, it's not passive, it's actually dynamic. So you push into them, and then you release, and it makes you extend, okay? And that makes it longer. Because it actually causes it because of the way the muscles contract, and it will cause you to actually have a longer distance. So it'll actually give you more range. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's a dynamic stretch. So a dynamic stretch is actually you're using somebody else and you're pushing against them and moving away. And so
I was under the impression that was called passive stretching.
No, it's a dynamic stretch because you're actually consciously pushing in and relaxing out, and pushing in and relaxing out and pushing in. Okay, so that's why it's a dynamic stretch, because
when you say you're pushing, are you talking about an external force pushing on the person, or the individual stretching?
The individual that's stretching is pushing into them and then relaxing, and it'll give them more length. And then they push again, and it gives more length. And so it gives what you're looking for in that concept. It gives you more. It'll give you more flexibility and more and a longer stretch.
See, I've had a lot of.
I'll have to do that and show you facilitated stretching. I've actually studied that pretty heavily.
The only thing is, I hear the terms used in opposing and different contexts.
And I agree with that.
Because you hear the term active stretching, passive stretching, dynamic stretching, yes. PNF.
Passive stretching is closer to a static stretch, except for you're not really consciously trying to stretch. It's just it's kind of being moved into a movement. If that makes sense.
So yes, because my understanding of passive stretching was an external force, like a trainer or a person,
mm-hmm.
Acting upon the person being stretched, and the person being stretched is
relaxing
in a relaxed state.
Yes, and that's not dynamic stretching. You are correct.
I'm talking that's what I'm going to clarify.
Yes, the person that's stretching is pushing into them and then relaxing, and then pushing into them and then relaxing.
So it's almost kind of like a PNF in a way.
It's very similar.
Okay.
Yes, it's tied together with it.
Okay.
So, but that doing that beforehand sets the muscles up to be in a stretch state, not a contracted state. Now, when you're talking about doing a warm up and you're going into a similar type concept by doing a deep squat, preceding a squat itself with weights. That's not necessarily the same beast, because you're actually keeping yourself in a contracted movement. So you're not allowing that stretch to truly happen. You're giving more range of movement because you're actually warming up the areas, and which is a good thing, and I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's the reason why when you started to talk, I wanted to.
So you're saying that dynamic stretching is defined as what you just explained,
mm-hmm.
not just movement based.
Correct.
Range of motion.
And dynamic stretching is something that is something that's great for after too. It's better than doing a static stretch. Period. And if you have somebody,
I agree with that.
If you have somebody who knows how to do a dynamic stretch, it's going to. I'm probably too far away. So if I am, sorry, people.
Well, it's just like I told you a few weeks ago. I have completely stopped doing any static stretching. Except on my adductors, I do that sometimes. But
mm-hmm. I'm a believer in static stretching. Yeah, don't get me wrong on this.
But I increased my hamstring flexibility just by doing high kicks way faster than I've ever increased my hamstring flexibility from doing a sit and reach. And
I'm going to tell you, if you did facilitated stretching with your leg on somebody's shoulder and pushed down on it, mm-hmm. and then they pushed up higher, and you relaxed and did more of a mm-hmm. passive reaction to it. At that point, you're going to get a much
That's
faster,
actually what we did in Taekwondo.
Absolutely, and that causes it to be a lot faster in getting a better stretch. Now, do I believe in stretching? Yes, and like I said, that's why I thought we should incorporate this in this discussion, because stretching is an after fact. It's not a before fact. Before, when you're growing up, they tell you stretch to warm up and get into the movement, start stretching, and do this stuff. All that does is set you up potential for injury, because it causes you to be in a state where your body's wanting to go to a longer distance when it wants to contract when it's in the movement. And so because of that, you have more potential for injury. And that's the reason I'm a little nervous about stretching.
You don't like the idea of it for increasing proper range of motion in people who are too tight for certain movements?
Nope. I would rather have them going through a warm-up concept like you're talking, like doing hip mobilities, doing shoulder mobility exercises,
but
knee.
You're classifying
knee
that
rotations.
as something different because the muscle
because
is
it's a warm-up.
in a
Contracted state.
semi-contracted state.
Absolutely. Okay. It's completely a different beast. But is it good? I think it's great. I think warm-ups are a good thing.
I'm just clarifying
Well,
so I can get
absolutely.
what you're saying.
That's why I put the A-ball down.
Yeah,
so we can go back and forth. Because now we should be talking
Now we
about
can have
this.
a conversation.
Well, we need to. Because at this point, to actually get this across to everybody else, there's no way to do this unless we're actually talking about it at this point.
Yeah.
Because if we keep going back and forth, it's not going to work.
What is the ideal warm-up? Not necessarily, because you said you neglect warm-ups.
I do without
what do you
crazy
believe
bad.
is the ideal warm-up?
For
we'll talk in terms of
full body
safety and effectiveness.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. So you and I both quite a bit believe in full body workouts, but I want to be able to differentiate. So are we talking full body at this point? Are we talking like
bro split?
Kind of a split?
Let's do full body, because we don't really recommend bro splits unless certain situations.
Well, and you can do bro splits. Like I said before, I think you can use bro splits in an intelligent way, but you have to know what you're doing. There's people.
I think
out there,
people benefit more from full bodies.
I think they do overall, and I think if they do it three times a week, it's going to be better for them. They're going to get more. They're still going to get more volume, which I think volume is part of lifting. It's beneficial, but. I don't want to sidetrack. I'll get sidetracked easily onto why bro splits are okay.
Yeah.
But I would warm up my ankles. I would warm up my knees by doing rotations. I would, if I was doing this correctly, which I don't do, but I would use your concept on your hip, because that's smart, and then I would go in and start doing leg workout. The honest to goodness truth, though.
So you only warm up what you're going to work.
That's what I would personally do, because you're setting up for it. The problem is when you start to warm up over time through the whole thing, it's going to lengthen your workout to a much longer duration that you should do. So you can actually do a full body warm up routine where you're doing it rotations of your knees, you're doing your rotations and strengthening of your ankles. You can go into your hips, you can move into your shoulders. At which point I would go into a full.
So I do have a question for you, because I've been taught from my martial arts background too about doing knee rotations, but as we know, the knee is a hinge joint.
It is.
It flexes and extends.
Yep.
It's not designed to rotate.
It's not made to rotate. You're right, because it's
pretty
a
much.
hinge.
That's what I'm
You're
saying.
right. It's forward to back.
So wouldn't you then line yourself up to be more prone to injury by trying to do a rotationary movement with only a hinge joint? And you would be lengthening the joint tissues by doing that.
I would have to agree with that. The only reason why I can anecdotally say no to that is when I do rotations, my knees don't hurt as much.
But when you do rotations, aren't you also flexing and extending the joint?
Yeah.
So are you not just pumping blood flow through it by doing the flexion extension?
Which I believe completely. But I think that rotation is the reason why
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
No, which is totally cool, dude. I think it's a fair question.
Stretching being an issue. So if you're rotating a hinge joint, you're stretching the tissues in a way it's not designed to.
What you'd be stretching is you'd be stretching ligaments and you'd be stretching tendons. So you're right. I don't disagree with you at all, dude, to be honest. But anecdotally, for me, it makes my knees hurt less.
That's what I'm saying. But couldn't you just do a extension flexion type movement?
In theory, like I said, I'm not as good at warming up as you are, but that's why I do the warm up with my knees.
Okay, I was just curious.
No. It's like I said, I'm not.
I just wondered if
I'm
you
not
had
disagreeing
a
with
specific
you at all.
reason for rotation.
Just because it doesn't hurt my knees hurt less when I do it. Is the reason why I do it, and I feel more benefit when I do that. But that being said, no, you have a point. Like I said, I'm not denying your point. I think your point's great. Like we talked, Taylor brought this up to me when I came in today that we were going to talk about this, and And like I said to him at the beginning, it's like, just to reiterate it in front of them, you're better by far at warming up than I am. You do a much better idea of warming up than I do by far. I think if I would actually do the extensions,
the shoulder rotations
where I was using a stick is what I want to get to, but where I was using a band so I could go up all the way down and in the back and in front, I think that would be phenomenal for my shoulder. But to be honest, I'm too lazy to do it. And so what do? I use the movement itself to warm myself up. That's why I'm saying, in all honesty, I think that's not necessarily the right way to do it. I think to take a few minutes at the beginning to actually warm yourself up is substantially more intelligent, and it gets a blood flow into that area without necessarily raising your heart rate or anything like that. I think doing a warm up correctly, you're not going to necessarily get any kind of aerobic type reaction. You're getting or respiratory or cardiovascular. I think you're going to get a joint related. That's what I'm saying. I think what your warm ups are going to be beneficial in more of like a lubricating concept than a.
Now that I think about it, part of my reason for increasing circulatory blood flow is because of my pre-workout.
That would make sense because I don't do a pre-workout
now that
at all.
I think about it, because I was thinking about why do I because I don't do a lot of aerobic training,
right?
Other than the blood flow delivery concept, I realized why am I incorporating the blood flow? Well, for energy delivery, but I already know that I'm well fueled appropriately for myself. But then I realized, well, I do have my little amino acid blend that I create myself, that I take in a specific time frame, and so by increasing circulation, I increase the delivery of those nutrients.
That makes sense.
So I guess to bring it back to purpose of the
that makes sense.
That
actually makes sense to me.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but I just
no. Like I said,
my head.
Well, that's why I put that down, is because I want us to discuss this. Now we're at the beginning of it. I thought we should probably do point for point for.
We should do that when we have when we keep interrupting each other and having like very
disputes.
Disputes. Yeah,
I think that's why I grabbed it.
Viewpoints.
That's when you were talking.
That's a
like,
good idea.
Time to do this. That's why we have not tried that before, people. This was an attempt at seeing how this goes. But I think in all honesty, what you're saying is I agree with it. I think I need to do it more often.
So do you think that we should do a combination of both of what we do, or like what? So ideally, how much time frame would you dedicate to a warm up, and what specifically would you chronologically go through for a warm up, so people get an idea of what you recommend?
I think a true warm up should be at the beginning. I really think you should warm up probably a full body. You should take time to do everything. I think you should do a knee rotation to an extent. Because I think that I don't think it weakens tendons or ligaments, to be honest. I think it doesn't cause tearing. If you do an extreme stretch, it's going to cause tearing. And if you do that,
you'll feel that.
Yeah, and that's a mistake. But I think the warming up factor of it actually, like I said, for me personally, it's been very beneficial. Doesn't mean you can't do it in a different way. But I think you really should warm up without question. I think minimum, if you haven't done something before you start doing something like a bench press, you should do push-ups beforehand just to warm up, to get it going a little bit.
And that's what I call a priming exercise.
And I would agree with you. That's more of a priming exercise than a warm-up.
And for me to define it, when I do a priming exercise, it's not about working out. It's not about fatigue. It's not about work. It's about activation. It's about
activation and controlling injury.
And so I do that because I do things like I said, a hip bridge or a kettlebell swing, because if done properly, you recruit the crap out of the glutes.
Well, and it changes your focus.
I mean, not literally, but
no, that's funny.
No, but
no, it changes your focus, and I can see that for sure. That's why I said I think that's smart. I think that's highly intelligent. Now, granted, if somebody has a hip that fires correctly, I don't think that's necessarily. They don't necessarily need to do that.
Correct.
They still need to warm up their knees, and they still need to warm up their ankles because of the nature of what it'll do to them. And the joint itself can't take the actual pressure. A hip joint in general, unless somebody has a hip problem, can take the pressure 90% of the time before they even start working out. But it may not fire correctly, and I know you use that as a firing mechanism, which is a great reason to warm up.
But I agree with you that I think that's another component of warm-ups, is warm-ups should be personalized.
Yes,
just like any other aspect of training.
Right.
If you don't need to work on hip extension by firing your glutes, like I don't have to, I just kind of like doing that.
No, because it gives you.
But a
focal
lot
point.
of my clients have problems with hip extension
Right.
because of tight hip flexors because they stay seated all day because of desk jobs,
which is normal in our world that we live in today.
Yeah, so that's why I see it all the time, and that's why I emphasize a lot of hip extension primers. But you're right in that if someone doesn't have a problem with it, they don't necessarily have to focus priming exercises,
right? But they still
on certain areas.
They still need to do a warm up because if they don't, their joint themselves has more potential than injury, and that's the reason why when you brought this up, I was like, I do it now more than I used to because my knees have been hurting me a lot again. And again, I'm somewhat lazy when I do this for myself, but incorporating them is an intelligent move without question. I think priming exercises, and this is I think where we would have differed before we started talking about this, is priming exercises you need to do if somebody's firing incorrectly or if they want to change their focus point.
Yeah.
Because what I do when I'm training somebody, so let's say we're doing face pulls, pulling it towards your face on a cable machine. I will stand behind them and touch where I want it to so they can feel where they should be flexing.
Get them to communicate that neuromuscular connection.
Yes, it's a mind. They call it the mind-muscle connection.
Yep,
and they found that scientifically speaking, and I think that in the forum Taylor posted this from Jake Wilson, but they show a guy doing curls with dumbbells.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and he just does the movement without focusing on it mentally. And they show it actually with a machine to actually see the basically the neural connections of the muscle and the firing of the activation. That's the word I'm looking for of the muscle itself. And there was almost no bicep connection there until he mentally focused on the bicep and the curl. I think you do the same thing with what you're talking about with your priming stuff, and it helps. Right, and it helps quite a bit if you can have somebody that's training you touch the actual points. Now, when you bring in restrictions, that's another reason to do a primer that's completely unrelated. It changes it because touching a point when they're restricted, it's not going to change it. They're going to focus on that point, but it's not going to make them mentally connect to it because they can't.
Yeah.
Until they do that primer, because we've talked about that before, privately. But and I think that's great, dude. I think that's amazingly good. But I that's why when we were talking about this, I wanted to kind of go over some of this stuff because, like I said, I'm honestly not good at warming up. I'm very good at getting people to hit what they want, what I want them to hit when I'm training with them, by getting them to focus differently. But I stink at doing them correctly, warm ups, and so I'm kind of taking advantage of this to have a discussion about this with you about it. But
so for your joint warm ups or the ideal joint warm up, what type of thing would you do? Like, would you use would you have even just to warm up the joint? Obviously, you're going through ranges of motion. Are you doing that with resistance on the muscle? Are you doing that with just body movements and just focusing on the joint movement itself?
Depends.
Are you doing isometric or what?
It depends. I don't do
so
isometric.
that people can get an idea of how to warm up their joints. So they know to warm up their joints, but how do they do that?
See, isometric stuff I don't do at all because I don't think that really gives you a. It's not a true warm up.
Yeah, I don't do it either.
No, no, and it's fair because isometric is something we'll have to talk about in the future anyway because we haven't talked about it at all in these podcasts. But isometric is a completely different thing. Does it work? It does a great job with a lack of resistance. You take out not an actual outside resistance, okay? Because isometric is pushing against yourself. Does it work? Yes, it works without question. But it's a different thing. I don't think it's a warm up at all. I look for movement that is going to now. It depends again, and that's what I was saying when you were asking the question. It depends on when you're talking about specific areas. My knees, I do not want to put resistance on a weighted resistance on my knees because my knees are so almost fragile about how they can deal with things. So if I add resistance to it, it's a problem, and they seem to get weaker, not better.
Well, and that's that personalized aspect.
Exactly
for you.
Right. Now my shoulder's a different beast. If I actually put weight into it and I start doing like rotations with 2.5 to 5 pounds, and I start doing an arm rotation, extended, my shoulder will dynamically work better. I don't, like I said, I don't do it very often, but when I do it, it actually is beneficial. If I do the rotation where I can even describe this on here, but when I start lifting it up in a different fashion with weight. It also was helpful. Okay, do I have to have weight? No, it still warms my shoulder up, but weight does better for warming up my shoulder than non-weight.
The appropriate light amount of resistance.
Exactly right. So, but when I start doing it with my knees, it is a completely different beast. If I were to put weight on trying to warm my knees up, I would be in trouble. Now, granted, if I do squats and I do deep all the way to the floor idea squats, okay, and I do it controlled and slow, and I haven't even warmed up, my knees get stronger. So it's a different beast. So in some ways, that's warming my knees up.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. That's how I used to do it. Is I'd take a weight, I'd put it on my shoulders, I would go really super slow all the way down to the lowest point I could go, and then I would come back up completely controlled. The problem with doing that is my knees pop like crazy, so I think there's a problem in my joint that when I do that, it's extending it too far. But I don't know that, so it's anecdotal, because they feel better when I do it. And they feel they continue to feel better even when I add more weight to it, as long as I do it slow and controlled. That's why when I say to people, I have a problem with people going below 90 degrees if they aren't controlling it and keeping focal on how quick they go down and up. You know,
because they put a lot of elastic tension
exactly
on their joint
right.
tissues when they bounce.
Right, and that's how I blew my knees when I was a kid. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do I believe in warming up 100 times over?
Okay, so let's review. Yes, you should warm up. You should warm up the joint systems.
Yep.
Your warm-ups should be personalized
without
to
question.
your individual needs, especially injuries and things like that.
Right. Well, let's add a hair to that statement. So they don't necessarily have to be extremely personalized if you're in good physical condition.
Yeah.
When you start to come outside of the normal
physical
condition,
I guess if there's the presence of a personal need, then you address it.
Exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yes, and they should be personalized to every single person that has an injury site at all.
They should include priming exercises as needed.
Yes.
If you have a hard time having a specific muscle group firing, or you're not your form isn't good on a specific exercise, you can do priming exercises to get the right muscles activated to perform it better.
Right.
And it does not necessarily have to be aerobic.
I would lean away from aerobic, to be honest.
Why do you say that?
Because aerobic starts to. We talked about muscle fibers in another episode, and it recruits. Aerobic activity tends to recruit type 1 muscle fibers, not type 2 muscle fibers, and so because of that, you've recruited the wrong system, and your body's going to want to lean towards going to type 1 muscle fibers instead of type 2.
Interesting. That's good.
Why.
Now, are there any other components to warm-ups that you think we should cover?
I think we should do a beginning and end. So I think we should talk about the fact, because see, this is what I recommend.
You're saying post?
Yeah, post stuff. So
should we save that for a recovery episode?
Oh, you know what? Considering the duration we're at, we probably should.
Because I think we could do a whole episode on recovery. And
we can definitely talk recovery, because recovery. Okay, so I'm going to throw out some insights on what Taylor and I are working on for you guys. That he doesn't know I'm putting out there. I don't think he'll be bothered by this, because it's not like we're hiding it.
So bothered by you.
He's so lying.
If I was bothered by you, I don't think we would be continuing to do the podcast.
That's true. No, that's true. Taylor and I are pretty good buddies. But anyway, so we're trying to put together a program, actually multiple things, as we're going through this.
I want to give them one more detail.
Okay.
We have already conceptualized 2 years of programming for you.
Yeah, that's true.
It will not be released in one program. It'll be different phases of programming that will truly teach you about how to work out properly for specific outcomes. There are programs the majority of programs out there suck. There are some programs out there that try, and there are some programs out there that are exceptional.
Yes.
And they're few and far between. We plan on developing a program that is like that for you, and we have concepts for about 2 years of programming for you already.
Yeah, no, that
has been started.
Right, and that's fair. And we want to do a basic kind of a starter book that we want to put on like Amazon, Nook, and that kind of stuff. And then we're going to also put together some other stuff, but as well, not specifically program related, but you guys, we've already talked about the idea of doing supplement type stuff. We're going to release more than one thing on supplements. So yeah, we got a few things in the works, but anyway, I wanted to share that with you guys, because we're kind of going down that direction. We haven't talked about it with you guys yet, so I thought I would share the concept of that, and that's where our future is leaning at this point. But
were you going to say something more about the book or
recovery was part of it, and so that's going to be kind of tied together. That's the reason why I brought it up. But recovery is going to be a portion of it that he and I haven't really formulated how we're going to incorporate it. But recovery is such a dynamic thing that when we talk about it, we will give a basis to it. But it's kind of, there's more to it than we may even cover in that. But we are going to cover that without question in the not necessarily programs, but we'll call it programs for lack of a better word. In the programs that we're coming forward with in the future. So,
cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So hopefully that gives you guys some ideas on what a warm-up entails, how to engage in a warm-up, what do's and don'ts of a warm-up, and a little bit of a teaser for what is to come in the future.
Yeah.
From Metabolic Radio, your source for fitness truth.
The hint.
Okay, guys. We will catch you next time. Talk to you later.
Hasta.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Shane and I hope you learned something new and exciting today about your own health and fitness. Head over to metabolicradio.com. There you'll find our bios and our results-driven programs that are designed to help teach you everything you need to know when it comes to getting real permanent results. You can also sign up for our newsletter to get free weekly updates. To chat with Shane or I, just email us at taylor@metabolicradio.com or shane@metabolicradio.com. We would love to hear from you. You can also join the conversation on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com and search for Metabolic Radio Private Forum. There you can request to join the group. We would love to add you to the conversation and answer your questions on the show. And hey, if you like our podcast, please help us grow our community by leaving us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. We would really appreciate your help. Thanks again so much for all your support and your listenership. Now go out there and spread the good word of fitness.